It started with a smell. Not perfume or cologne, nothing subtle like that. It was motor oil, faint but unmistakable, clinging to Rebecca's clothes when she hugged me as I came home from work. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she'd leaned against my car in the driveway or brushed past some mechanic's tool chest at work. But then it happened again. And again. Rebecca worked in marketing, far from anything mechanical. The smell was out of place, an odd detail that scratched at my brain like a splinter I couldn't ignore. But I ignored it anyway. You don't get to 12 years of marriage without learning how to let little things go. Besides, Rebecca had been through a rough patch at work lately, long hours, tight deadlines, and the occasional sharp word thrown my way. Stress, I told myself. She's just stressed. Then came the nights when she started staying out later than usual. It was always work meetings, presentations, team building dinners that stretched into midnight. The excuses were plausible, reasonable even, but something about them didn't sit right. The Rebecca I knew hated staying out late on weeknights. She'd complain endlessly about being too tired the next morning, or about wasting money on overpriced cocktails. Now, she'd come home smiling, her cheeks flushed, and head straight to the shower without saying much. I'd asked her once, casually, about the late nights. Client dinners, she'd said with a shrug, her tone light. You know how it is. But I didn't know. And something in her voice told me she didn't want me to either. The final straw was the tire tread. It was Monday, and I'd taken Rebecca's car to the shop for an overdue oil change. On the way there, I noticed a distinctive groove in one of the tires, a pattern I knew wasn't from the roads in our neighborhood. It was muddy, deep, and jagged, like the kind of trail you'd pick up driving on gravel or dirt. Rebecca didn't go anywhere like that. Her office was downtown, all smooth asphalt and parking garages. Her gym, her hairdresser, her favorite cafes, none of them were in the kind of place where a tire would pick up mud like this. That night, I brought it up, trying to sound casual as we ate dinner. Did you drive out to the country recently? I noticed your tires had some gravel stuck in them. She froze mid-bite, her fork hovering just above her plate. It was the kind of pause that stretched on too long, a tiny fracture in her practiced ease. Oh, that, she said, smiling quickly. One of my coworkers needed a ride to a meeting last week. The GPS took us down some back road. Which coworker? I asked, not letting it drop. Tony, she said after a beat too long. From accounting. Tony from accounting. The guy she used to call Mr. Spreadsheet because of his dull anecdotes about Excel formulas. The guy who, according to Rebecca, was allergic to stepping outside in case it ruffled his khakis. That was the first time I felt the blood drain from my face. I didn't press her further that night. I just nodded, finished my dinner, and smiled like I bought every word. But inside, something was shifting. Something dark. I didn't know what was going on yet, but I knew one thing for certain: Rebecca was lying to me. The unease gnawed me over the next few days. I didn't want to confront Rebecca, not yet. If I was going to accuse her of something, I needed to know exactly what I was accusing her of. My mind bounced between paranoia and denial, questioning whether I was being irrational or if there really was something going on. Then Wednesday came, and with it, an opportunity one hadn't anticipated. I'd taken the day off work to handle a few errands and repair the garage door that had been acting up for months. Rebecca, as always, left for work around 8:30 a.m., dressed sharp and ready for another busy day at the office. I watched her car disappear down the street and got to work in the garage, hoping the rhythm of tools and wood would keep my mind from wandering to her excuses and Tony from accounting. But when I stepped inside for a water break around 10:30 a.m., I noticed something strange. Rebecca's laptop was sitting on the kitchen counter, open but in sleep mode. She never left it behind, not even when she went out for a quick errand. She'd always been glued to it, claiming she needed to stay connected to work emails. I stared at the laptop for a moment, my heart beating faster than it should have. I wasn't the type to snoop. I believed in privacy, in trust. But trust was precisely what I was starting to lose. I hesitated, then reached out and flipped the screen open. The laptop woke with a soft hum, and to my surprise, there was no password prompt. The desktop loaded instantly, cluttered with icons for work folders, email shortcuts, and a couple of spreadsheets. My pulse pounded as I debated whether I should go further. Then I saw the folder titled Presentations _2023. It was innocuous enough, but something about it stood out. Rebecca's work presentations had always been straightforward, boring, even. She'd often complained about how mundane they were. But the folder had a subfolder labeled Personal in lowercase letters. I clicked it. At first, it looked harmless: a few photos, a Word document titled Ideas, and a video file with no specific name, just a date, last Friday. I opened the video. The screen showed what looked like the interior of a dimly lit garage. The view was shaky, as though recorded by someone holding a phone. The camera panned to a car, Rebecca's car, and stopped as a man walked into the frame. My stomach tightened. He was tall, maybe late 30s, with a cocky grin and an oil-streaked shirt. He leaned casually against Rebecca's car and said something to the person recording. And then Rebecca stepped into view. She was laughing. Not her usual polite laugh, the kind she used at office parties or family gatherings, but a laugh I hadn't heard in years, free, unguarded. She wore the same blouse and pencil skirt she'd worn to work that day, but her hair was pulled loose, and she looked completely at ease. The man said something I couldn't hear, and Rebecca slapped his arm playfully before leaning against the car next to him. I stopped the video. My hands trembled as I closed the folder and shut the laptop. It was enough. I didn't need to see more. Rebecca wasn't at work that day. She was here, wherever here was, with him. The video answered one question but raised 100 more. Who was he? How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I noticed sooner? I spent the next hour pacing the living room, my thoughts racing in circles. Part of me wanted to call her immediately, to demand an explanation, to make her feel the same humiliation I was feeling. But another part of me, colder, more calculating, knew that would accomplish nothing. I needed to be smart about this. I checked the clock. It was almost noon. Rebecca wouldn't be home until at least 6:30 p.m., and I had no intention of sitting around stewing in my anger. I grabbed my keys and headed out, determined to clear my head and decide my next move. By the time I returned home that evening, I'd made a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than acting on impulse. I would follow her. Not in a creepy, obsessive way, but just enough to figure out where she was really going during those late nights and long workdays. Thursday came, and Rebecca's routine was predictable as ever. She left for work on time, her smile warm but rushed as she kissed me goodbye. I waited 15 minutes before getting into my own car and driving to her office downtown. She wasn't there. I circled the parking lot twice to be sure, but her car was nowhere in sight. Frustration bubbled up, but I pushed it down. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to think of where she might have gone. Then I remembered the video. The garage. The man in the oil-streaked shirt. I searched online for auto shops near her office and found 3 within a 10-mile radius. The first was a clean, corporate-looking place that didn't match the gritty vibe of the video. The second was closed. The third, tucked away on a quiet side street, was exactly what I was looking for. Rebecca's car was parked out front. I pulled into a spot across the street, my heart hammering as I watched the shop. Minutes passed, then half an hour. Finally, the door opened, and there she was, Rebecca, walking out with the man from the video. I gripped the steering wheel tightly as they talked, their faces close, their body language too familiar. She laughed again, that same unguarded laugh, before getting into her car and driving away. I followed her from a distance, careful not to get too close. She didn't go back to the office. Instead, she headed to a small cafe on the edge of town. I parked across the street and watched as she met up with another man, older this time, dressed in a suit. My mind reeled. What the hell was she doing? By the time she got home that night, I felt like I'd aged 10 years in a single day. But one thing was clear: Rebecca wasn't just lying. She was leading an entirely separate life, and I was determined to uncover every last detail of it. Rebecca came home at 6:45 that evening, her keys jingling as she opened the door. She walked in with the same practiced ease, setting her bag on the counter and kicking off her heels. "Hey, honey," she called out, her voice light. "What's for dinner?" I was sitting in the living room, staring at the darkened TV. My stomach churned as I thought about what I'd seen earlier that day. The man at the garage. The second man at the cafe. The lies layered over lies. My pulse thundered in my ears as she approached, her footsteps echoing across the hardwood floor. "Mike?" Her voice broke through my thoughts. She peeked her head into the living room, her face lit up with a smile. Earth to Mike. "You okay?" I didn't respond immediately. My hands gripped the armrests of the chair as I fought to keep my composure. Part of me wanted to explode, to shout, to demand answers right then and there. But the colder, calculating part of me, the one that had kept me grounded all day, held firm. "We need to talk," I said finally, my voice low and steady. Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "What's wrong?" "Sit down." I gestured to the couch across from me. My tone must have been sharper than I intended because she hesitated before slowly sitting down, her posture stiff. "Is this about work?" she asked cautiously. "Because I know I've been working late." "It's not about work," I interrupted. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on my knees as I stared at her. "I want to know the truth, Rebecca. No more lies." Her confusion deepened, and she tilted her head. "What are you talking about? You're not going to the office every day. And you're definitely not staying late for client dinners. So why don't you start by telling me where you were this afternoon?" Her eyes widened briefly, just a flash, but enough for me to notice. She recovered quickly, crossing her arms defensively. "I was at work, Mike. Where else would I be?" "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice rising. "I followed you today, Rebecca. I saw you at the garage. I saw you with that guy." Her face went pale, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she tried to laugh it off, a nervous, shaky sound that grated against my ears. "You followed me? Mike, that's..." "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off again. "Don't try to turn this around on me. I want the truth." Her mouth opened and closed, like she was searching for the right words. Finally, she shook her head, a thin veil of defiance slipping into her expression. "You're being ridiculous. There's nothing going on." "Really?" I shot back. "Because it sure as hell didn't look like nothing when I saw you laughing and flirting with some guy in an oil-stained shirt." "And what about the cafe? Who was the suit? Another co-worker?" Her jaw tightened, and she looked away, refusing to meet my gaze. The silence between us stretched, heavy and oppressive. I waited, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface, but she said nothing. "Answer me." I slammed my hand down on the coffee table, making her jump. "Who are they, Rebecca? How long has this been going on?" Her eyes snapped back to mine, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of fear. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "Mike, I swear, it's..." "Don't insult me," I interrupted, standing up so quickly the chair creaked behind me. "You've been lying to me for weeks, months, maybe. And now you're sitting here, trying to gaslight me? Do you think I'm stupid?" "I'm not gaslighting you," she yelled, rising to her feet as well. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Then explain it," I demanded, pointing a finger at her. "Explain the garage. Explain the cafe. Explain the goddamn gravel on your tires." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her shoulders slumping as the fight seemed to drain out of her. "I can't," she said softly, almost inaudibly. "Why not?" My voice cracked, the anger giving way to something raw. "Why can't you tell me the truth, Rebecca? After 12 years, don't I at least deserve that?" She didn't answer. Instead, she sat back down, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook, and I realized she was crying, not the loud, dramatic sobs of someone seeking sympathy, but quiet, restrained tears. I wanted to feel sympathy. I wanted to feel anything other than the hollow ache spreading through my chest. But I couldn't. All I could feel was the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a stone. When she finally spoke, her voice was muffled and thick with emotion. It wasn't supposed to be like this. What wasn't? I asked, my tone still sharp. What are you talking about? She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. I made a mistake, Mike. A stupid, selfish mistake. I froze, her words hanging in the air like a death sentence. What kind of mistake? Her lower lip trembled as she tried to form the words. It was one night, she whispered. At a work party. I drank too much, and it just happened. My stomach churned, and I had to take a step back, as if the distance would lessen the impact of her confession. With who? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then said, the guy at the garage. His name is Jake. He's not even from my office. He was a guest. I clenched my fists, my anger surging back to the surface. And the man at the cafe? Who's he? She shook her head. That's nothing. He's just someone I was meeting for work. I swear, Mike, there's nothing else. Do you really think I'm going to believe you? I snapped. After everything? You've been sneaking around, lying to me, and now you're sitting here, asking me to trust you? Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. She had brought this on herself. I made a mistake, she repeated, her voice breaking. I was scared to tell you because I didn't want to lose you. Well, congratulations, I said coldly. Because you just did. Rebecca's sobs filled the silence as I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My world had just shattered, and there was no going back. I spent the night in the spare bedroom. It was a small, cramped space we had turned into a guest room a few years ago. I had only used it when one of us was sick or when the kids had sleepovers and needed extra space. But tonight, it felt more like a refuge than an inconvenience. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the house settling. Sleep didn't come. I stared at the ceiling for hours, my mind racing with everything Rebecca had confessed. The garage. The man. The lies. I replayed her words over and over, each repetition sparking a fresh wave of anger. By the time the sun began to rise, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. Rebecca had built her lies on the foundation of our marriage, using the trust one had given her as a shield for her betrayal. She thought she could confess her mistake, shed a few tears, and expect me to forgive her. But forgiveness wasn't on the table. Not now. Not ever. After a cold shower and a cup of black coffee, I sat down at the kitchen table and began planning. Rebecca had left for work, or at least she said she was going to work. I no longer believed anything she told me. It didn't matter. She wouldn't see this coming. The first step was gathering evidence. I knew enough to confirm her affair with Jake, the guy at the garage, but I wanted more. I needed undeniable proof of her actions, something that couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding or a momentary lapse in judgment. I wasn't just angry, I was focused. I started with her laptop. The folder I had found earlier still haunted me, but I hadn't fully explored it. This time, I wasn't going to hold back. I connected a USB drive to her laptop and copied the entire folder, along with her email inbox, onto it. I scanned her messages quickly, looking for anything incriminating. It didn't take long to find a string of emails between her and Jake, confirming what I already knew. Flirty exchanges. Meeting times. Photos. There was no ambiguity in the content. Rebecca hadn't just slipped up once. This had been going on for months. The cafe meeting was the next thread to pull. Rebecca had tried to pass it off as innocent, but my gut told me there was more to the story. I checked her calendar and found a recurring entry labeled client lunch every other Thursday. Digging deeper, I found receipts in her email for those same dates, all from upscale restaurants and bars. This wasn't just work. By the time I was done, I had enough evidence to bury her in guilt and shame. But I wasn't finished. The second step was preparing my exit. Rebecca thought she had control, that she could manipulate me into staying, but I wasn't going to play her game. I called my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Karen I had met through a co-worker. I explained the situation in detail, leaving nothing out. She listened patiently before giving me clear, direct advice. "Get your financials in order first," she said. "Make sure your accounts are secure. If she's been hiding this affair, there's no telling what else she might have been hiding. Protect yourself and document everything." I thanked her and got to work. Our joint accounts were easy enough to handle. I transferred half of the money into a separate account under my name, leaving a clear paper trail in case Rebecca tried to accuse me of theft. I canceled the credit cards we shared and applied for new ones in my name. Next, I tackled the house. The mortgage was under both our names, but I wasn't about to let her keep it. I drafted a list of all our shared assets and sent it to Karen, who promised to draw up a strategy for splitting them in the divorce. By the end of the day, I had done everything I could to secure my position. I wasn't just preparing to leave Rebecca, I was preparing to dismantle the life we had built together. The third and final step was delivering the blow. I waited until Friday evening. Rebecca came home as usual, her expression wary but calm. She had tried to reach out to me earlier in the week, asking if we could talk, but I had ignored her. Now, she sat across from me at the dining table, her hands folded nervously. "I want to fix this," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you, Mike, but I love you." Stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand. "I don't want to hear it." Her face crumpled, but she stayed silent. I reached into my bag and pulled out the USB drive, placing it on the table between us. "This is everything," I said. "Every email, every message, every receipt. It's all here." Rebecca stared at the drive, her face pale. "Mike, I'm filing for divorce," I said, cutting her off. "And you're going to sign the papers without a fight. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've been doing." Her eyes widened in horror. "You can't do that." "I can and I will," I said firmly. "You lied to me, Rebecca. You betrayed me. And now, you're going to deal with the consequences." She tried to argue, to plead, but I didn't listen. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I had taken control of the situation, turned her lies into her downfall. This wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was about justice. And Rebecca was finally getting what she deserved. I stayed at a hotel that night, far enough from the house to give myself some breathing room. I couldn't stand the sight of the place anymore, and I needed distance to think clearly. The divorce papers were ready, but there was still one more thing to settle, the final conversation. I didn't want it to drag on. Rebecca would try to apologize, to justify, to twist the narrative in her favor. I had no intention of letting her manipulate me again. This time, I would control the conversation, set the terms, and leave nothing open to debate. The next morning, I texted her. Be home at 3 p.m. We're having one last talk." She didn't respond immediately, but an hour later, my phone buzzed. "Rebecca *, I'll be there." The clock moved agonizingly slow. At 2:45 p.m., I parked my car down the street from our house and waited. By 3:05 p.m., her car pulled into the driveway. She sat in it for a moment, as if steeling herself, before stepping out. Rebecca walked into the house, and I followed behind her, shutting the door quietly. She looked surprised to see me already inside. "You came in through the back?" she asked. I didn't answer. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the couch in the living room. She hesitated but complied, sitting at the edge of the cushion. I sat in the armchair across from her, keeping the coffee table between us. "Let's get this over with," I said, my voice cold. She flinched at the tone. "Mike, please. Can we just talk like two people who?" "Two people who what?" I snapped. Two people who love each other? Two people who trust each other? You killed that the second you decided to cheat on me. She looked down, her hands trembling in her lap. I made a mistake. I've admitted that. I'm trying to fix it. Fix it? I leaned forward, my eyes boring into hers. How do you fix this, Rebecca? How do you fix months of lying, sneaking around, and humiliating me behind my back? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. You've been sleeping with Jake for months, haven't you? I pressed. And don't insult me by denying it. I've seen the emails, the messages. I know everything. She shook her head, her voice breaking. It wasn't like that. It wasn't serious. Not serious? I interrupted, laughing bitterly. You destroyed our marriage for something that wasn't serious? Her tears spilled over, but she didn't respond. Here's how this is going to go, I said, my tone flat. I've filed for divorce. The papers are ready, and you're going to sign them. You'll get your share of the assets, nothing more, nothing less. I'm keeping the house, and you're leaving. You'll have a week to pack your things and find somewhere else to stay. She stared at me, her expression a mixture of shock and desperation. Mike, please. I can't just leave. This is my home too. Not anymore, I said firmly. You made your choice when you brought Jake into our lives. You chose him over me, over us. Now you'll deal with the consequences. Rebecca stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. You think this is easy for me? You think I'm not paying for what I did? You haven't begun to pay, I said, standing as well. You've had your fun, your secret life. Now it's time to face reality. Her voice rose, the tears giving way to anger. I'm still your wife, Mike. I've been with you for 12 years, through everything. Doesn't that count for something? Not anymore, I said, meeting her glare without flinching. You killed any goodwill I had for you. You don't get to play the victim now. She sat back down, burying her face in her hands as her sobs returned. I let the silence hang for a moment before reaching into my bag and pulling out the divorce papers. Sign these, I said, placing them on the coffee table in front of her. If you refuse, I'll take this to court. And trust me, with the evidence I have, it won't end well for you. Rebecca looked up, her face streaked with tears. Do you hate me that much? I hesitated, the question catching me off guard. Did I hate her? The anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, those were all-consuming. But hate? I don't know what I feel anymore, I admitted. But I know I don't want to be with you. Not after this. She reached for the papers with trembling hands, her tears falling onto the table as she signed each page. When she was done, she pushed them back toward me, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I never wanted it to end like this, she whispered. Neither did I said, standing and picking up the papers. But you made your choices, Rebecca. Now I'm making mine. I turned and walked toward the door, pausing only once to look back. She sat there, staring at the empty space in front of her, broken in a way I had never seen before. I walked out without another word, closing the door on 12 years of marriage and the woman I thought I knew. The days after I walked out were a blur of logistics and emotions. For the first time in 12 years, I was navigating life alone, and it wasn't easy. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, sparse but functional. It wasn't home, it wasn't even close, but it was a fresh start. Rebecca moved out of the house the following week. I didn't help her pack. We communicated only through lawyers, and I made sure our interaction stayed as cold and distant as possible. I didn't want to hear her excuses or see her face. I had no interest in the person she'd become. The divorce itself was surprisingly quick. The evidence I had collected gave me a strong case, and Rebecca's lawyer advised her to cooperate. She didn't contest the settlement. I kept the house, most of the savings, and a fair split of the other assets. It was over in less than 2 months. But the legalities were only part of the process. The real battle was internal. For weeks, I felt like I was dragging myself through life. The mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up in the unfamiliar apartment, the silence pressing down on me like a physical weight. Every now and then, I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text Rebecca or remind her about something mundane, only to stop and feel the sharp reminder of why I couldn't. The anger lingered too. It wasn't as fiery as before, but it was there, simmering just beneath the surface. Every time I thought about the lies she told, the months she spent sneaking around with Jake, I felt a surge of rage. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the humiliation, the sense of being played for a fool. I started seeing a therapist about a month after moving out. At first, it felt pointless. Talking to a stranger about my problems wasn't going to fix anything, but I was desperate to stop feeling stuck. To my surprise, the sessions helped. The therapist didn't offer solutions or platitudes. Instead, she helped me untangle the mess of emotions I was carrying. Anger, hurt, grief, even love, what was left of it, anyway. She told me it was okay to feel everything, even the conflicting emotions that didn't make sense. You don't have to forgive her, she said one session, but you do have to let go of the anger. Not for her, but for yourself. Letting go was easier said than done. I spent hours replaying every argument, every red flag I had ignored. I questioned myself constantly. How did I not see it? Was I a bad husband? Could I have done something differently? The answers didn't come quickly, but they did come. Rebecca's choices weren't my fault. I didn't drive her to cheat. I didn't push her into Jake's arms. That was her decision, born out of her own selfishness and lack of integrity. It was a hard truth to accept, but it was necessary. Work became my anchor during those months. The familiar structure of deadlines and tasks kept me grounded. My colleagues, oblivious to my personal turmoil, provided a sense of normalcy I desperately needed. I poured myself into projects, taking on extra responsibilities and working late to fill the empty hours. My weekends were harder to fill. I didn't have many close friends, most of our social circle had been tied to Rebecca. The ones I did have were supportive but hesitant, unsure of how to navigate the new dynamic. "Let's grab a beer," my coworker Dan said one Friday after work. I agreed, more out of obligation than enthusiasm. But that night, sitting at a noisy bar with someone who didn't pity me, I felt a small spark of life return. We talked about work, sports, and stupid things that didn't matter. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. That night marked a turning point. I started making more of an effort to reconnect with people, to rebuild the social life I had neglected during my marriage. I joined a running group, something I hadn't done since my 20s, and rediscovered the simple joy of moving my body, of pushing myself physically. The anger began to fade, replaced by something quieter. Not peace, exactly, but a kind of acceptance. Rebecca's betrayal would always be a scar, but scars heal. They don't go away, but they don't hurt forever either. Months turned into a year. By the time the divorce anniversary came around, I had built a new rhythm to my life. I wasn't happy, not yet, but I was stable. The apartment felt more like home, with photos on the walls and a couch that didn't creak every time I sat on it. One day, I ran into Rebecca at the grocery store. It was the first time I had seen her since the divorce. She looked different, thinner and more tired, but the sight of her didn't trigger the anger I expected. We exchanged polite nods, nothing more. She started to say something, but I turned and walked away. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need anything. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. I thought about everything that had happened, about the life I had lost and the one I was rebuilding. Rebecca had taught me a brutal lesson about trust and betrayal, but she hadn't broken me. I was still standing. Still moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was going to be okay. What do you think about this story? Can betrayal be forgiven, or is it always the end of a relationship? Share your thoughts in the comments, your opinion matters and might support someone else. And don't forget to like the video if you like this story.